Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Great Black Speakers Podcast, where we connect through conversation. I am your host, Lawrence Watkins. I am the founder and CEO of Great Black Speakers Bureau. I'm also the president and chief operating officer of the Black Business School. So today we have a very special guest, my good friend for many, many years, Mr. Tre Baker. Tre is a Black empowerment engineer and the author of In the Black 2050, a model for Black economic leadership in the 21st century. And he's also the co-founder of Black Star Capital, and a Black investment club network that wants to help organize the Black economy. So Tre, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, Brother Watkins. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right, man. Doing all right. So you've been on this, or I guess on the show a couple times in the past.
Right.
So for the audience, just tell them a little bit more about yourself in terms of your background, just really quick, so they understand who they talking with, who they dealing with today.
Well, I describe myself as a Black Power engineer. I come up with strategies and solutions to achieve Black Power. And so my educational background is I started out as a engineering major at Vandy. Dang, 2006. So
Yep.
I'm over I'm over 10 years now, over 15 years now. But ended up not going into engineering. So I got the degree, but ended up going straight through business school. So went to Harvard Business School, graduated there, had my first corporate job for about 2 years, a little bit less than 2 years at GE, working on wind and solar projects, and realized that the corporate life wasn't for me. So left the plantation in 2010, 2009, 2010, and have been consulting, starting and running businesses, investing, things like that ever since. So um, yeah, man, I've been all. If you like actually looked at my career path, it's all over the place. So
It
it's
it
kind of
truly
hard
has
to
been all
narrow
over the
down.
place. And actually, I just thought about this right now. So me and Tre, we actually started a business together back into 2010, 2011.
Man, that shit would
So
be doing great right now had we kept it going with all this
I
shit
know,
going
right?
on.
Yeah. So about 10 years ago. So yeah, so he's one of my, I guess, co-founders for a project we had called Ujama Deals, which is a daily deal site for Black-owned businesses.
Yeah.
But now, like we said, you're working on Black empowerment, author of In the Black 2050, Black Star Capital. And I want to hear about your practical economic plan for Black America. So let's talk about the investment club piece first. First off, even before we get to that, in general, what does your plan look like for Black America from an economics perspective?
I mean, it's pretty simple. It's nothing that I've created or invented. Marcus Garvey told us this 100 years ago. It's simply sovereignty and self-determination. So we need to be economically independent and able to have the productive capacity to take care of our basic needs and wants. So there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to feed, clothe, house ourselves, create our own energy, have our own power utility networks and things like that. It's pretty simple. Everybody on the face of the planet who has any level of sovereignty does these things. Now we've been disconnected from ourselves and our culture for so long that we've uh, viewed progress in an integrated environment as some level of freedom. But you can't be free if you're economically dependent. So I'm essentially working on practical solutions and strategies to get us to economic independence and self-determination.
Well, let's talk about that because we're in the midst of, I guess, Black Lives Matter, and from a civil rights perspective, I guess they've probably then been the most productive or influential activist group that's out there, for Black people. But a big piece of their agenda has to do with, I guess, inclusion in terms of the United States in general. How do you be more inclusive with corporate America and so on and so forth. So talk about that a little bit, and what are your thoughts on that, and what would you change, compared to what they're doing?
Um, so you talk about civil rights. Civil rights is irrelevant to me. If you have economic power, you don't need civil rights. You do what you want because you're sovereign. Um, so their approach, I, what I would change is, I guess, everything. So there is a there. Black Lives Matter is a fundamentally integrationist approach. I approach things from a nationalist perspective. I don't worry about including people outside of Africans. I don't worry about uh, legislation, policy, anything that, unless it directly affects our interests. So I'm not concerned with civil rights. I'm concerned with having the power to prevent people from harming us. So I don't, no matter what my rights are, no matter what it says on a piece of paper or on a bill, people, I want to create a situation where there are consequences for attempting to oppress us in any or harm us in any way. So I guess for me, Black Lives Matter is essentially irrelevant to what I'm trying to do.
What you're trying to do.
Right.
Yet they are the dominant voice right now if you look at the media, right? So everywhere you
Right. And I mean
go,
that's not by accident. That's because what they're doing is acceptable to the power structure. You're not going to have somebody talking like I talk getting that much positive media coverage. Like that, they have no interest in this. So I do appreciate the awareness that they've created and the propaganda to get white people to care about Black issues temporarily, so that can help with some things. But I don't want to mistake that as an actual strategy for Black power, because that's not what it's going to result in. It's going to result in further dependency. What they're doing is creating an integrationist strategy that's going to result in further dependency on white people. It's not going to liberate Black people at all.
That's interesting. So let's look at the manifestations of that, right? And let's just look at it from an economic perspective. With let's first start with corporate America, and then we'll get into these government conversations as well.
Right.
So as it relates to corporate America, you see a lot of different diversity programs, coming about, or the talks of them. Statements from corporations saying that Black Lives Matter and they want to do something to help fix the problem. And even economically, you have a lot of white people who are considered allies, let's say of the Black Lives Matter movement, that type of thing, buying and purchasing Black. I've seen a lot of articles just really talking about that in terms of the increase in terms of Black business spend, in terms of people spending money with Black businesses over the last few weeks,
So
from
there's
that
been an
perspective.
increase in non-Black people spending money with Black businesses.
Both, I think both. Yeah, so both. I mean, and anecdotally, that's true. My wife has her yoga business, for example, and so many, a lot of more white people are coming through the doors than she's, used to.
Mm.
Even the Black business school, there are a lot of people who, want to know how they can actually even support that. But maybe not as much as some of these other organizations, because
Yeah.
we have a, very clear and strong message in terms of what we believe.
Right.
But anecdotally, we see that, all over the place. So, just talk about that in terms of what corporations are doing, and how do you view that as it relates to, I guess, your economic plan for Black America?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, kind of inspired by another one of your guests, Sean Rochester, with the Black tax and kind of how he thinks about corporate participation. And I just finished the article about diversity programs, basically saying that diversity programs, as they're implemented today, are functionally racist and probably hurt more than they help. So where I'm coming from in that is diversity programs continue the cycle of dependency. Black people being dependent on white power structures. So rather than focusing on hiring more Black people to work at Google, maybe focus more effort and resources on building up Black tech companies so they can reach the hiring capacity of Google. So Black engineers have more of an option when they're going through their job search. So, if I'm coming out of engineering school and I'm a Black person at the top of my class, I'm going to be drawn towards the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks, and things like that, and Silicon Valley, because that's where the money is and that's where the resources are. But if we had equally cool and well-resourced Black tech companies, they would have that option. So at least they don't feel like they have to sacrifice their career to go work for a Black-owned company, if one even exists in their field. So when I think about corporate participation, one, I always come back to reparations. First, pay us what you owe us. What we do with the money is not your business. It doesn't matter. Just give us. So we decide on a number. You decide how much you want to contribute to that bill. Period. And then after that, if you want to go above and beyond a reparations program, I would say focus more. If you want to focus on diversity of the cap table of your actual company. So having Black investors and owners of your company, the board makeup of your company, the board of directors, uh, supplier and vendor list. So how many Black-owned businesses are you buying from or selling to, or whatever are you working with that from a supplier perspective? And investing in startups and, well, not investing, giving grants, because I don't want you to have ownership in these things. Grants and donations to things that build Black productive capacity, economic productive capacity.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit too, then, right? Because I've been trying to just connect the dots on some things and some discrepancies in my mind, right? I guess the first has to do with like Black businesses and the investment of capital, or even let's call it grants and charity, that type of thing. That's the second thing that I want to talk about too, in terms of discrepancies in my mind. Discrepancies in my mind. For a while you have companies like Andreessen Horowitz that invested in, let's call it Bevel, with Tristan Walker. So shout out to Tristan, that eventually got bought out by whatever company, Procter and Gamble, where given the way how much they raised, the cap table, he probably didn't really walk away with like a windfall of equity, in terms of a payment. But now he has a really good job at Procter and Gamble, and somewhat control over Bevel. Of course, maybe not ultimate control, but he still is running his company as he was like before, right? And that's what happened in that type of case, where this was a really well funded company, and there's other Black companies that are becoming really well funded too, and yet we aren't seeing, I guess, the benefits of that in terms of like a Black Google, or like this really huge Black company that's out there.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that, where you still now you are seeing more companies that are well invested, that have raised quite a bit of capital, and yet still haven't really broke through to that next level in terms of, let's not even talk about unicorn status. Let's talk about $100 million or something like that, right? What do you think about that? What are you seeing, in the market, and like, how do you solve that discrepancy that I'm seeing, where, we talk about Black money, Black dollars, but it's not really translating into something else, especially when you have like these white-owned investors who are investing all this money into these Black-owned businesses?
Right. Man, there's a lot there. So one, it's not enough to just get funding if you don't have an infrastructure to use those funds. And if you don't have a strategy related, if you're not playing a role in a larger strategy for Black economic development. So we don't need just individual success stories. We need to take over whole industries. We need to be looking at this from a macroeconomic perspective. How does your business fit into the overall strategic plan for Black economic independence? Do we need another luxury handbag company? Probably not. Uh, is the problem that you're solving with your company just to make money, which I'm not opposed to. Maybe you build a company, get a liquidity event, and then use that money for what I'm talking about. But in terms of strategy, or in terms of why I don't think we're seeing a macroeconomic systemic level change from some of these outlier funding initiatives. Uh, One, it takes a while to build these things up. But two, I think mainly the problem is lack of cooperation and coordination among different efforts. So we need, I, I'm not a fan of centralization. So it's not one person or one entity coordinating this, but we need a set of entities that kind of agree on some strategic direction. So let's just take food as an example. There are many opportunities in food, from tech to just plain old farming, uh, you know, digging in the dirt. So you've got a lot of stuff around controlled environment agriculture that's kind of hot right now. growing stuff indoors, automating things, aeroponics, hydroponics, things like automated growing systems that are cool on the tech side. And then you've just got the basic blocking and tackling of buying land and building the soil back up, because we've been depleting the soil for the last 50 years, 60, 70 years since World War II. And the food system is directly dependent on the health of the global soil reserve. So we could start there, and everybody got to eat. So um, how I would tackle it is from downstream and upstream perspective. So downstream is retail level. So we need to be owning grocery stores, restaurants, and places where food is served, and then vertically integrating upstream toward all the way to the farm. So from distribution, storage, processing, packaging, we need to integrate in all that stuff. So I don't need just a black grocery store and that's it. I need a black grocery store with a black trucking company that delivers fresh produce from the farm to the grocery store and the farm, and the company that makes the sensors that test the pH of the soil. I need all that. So if I just create the grocery store, that grocery store is an island. It has no backup. It has nobody around to support it from a supplier perspective and from a customer perspective. So fundamentally, one, we need to focus more on coordinating our efforts, and two, building excellent businesses that can compete. So that, I mean, that's fundamental. So we don't need to rely on just being black owned to succeed. We need to be an excellent company that happens to be black owned and then also has a black agenda. So most founders and investors I've talked to have no black agenda, wouldn't know where to start to even think about that, and are simply trying to build wealth for themselves and maybe their investors, and have no larger strategy for how the community benefits or is affected by what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot to unpack right there, right? So
Yeah,
you talk about
that's
yeah,
all
I mean you
that
talk
is.
yeah, vertical integration of companies with a black agenda. So that's what I heard, and companies that are able to compete as well. And I think all that's great, and I think it's definitely necessary. And that might be another discussion in terms of how do we go about exactly doing that.
Well, that's what my
Something
book is about. So
yeah, there we go. So go get In the Black 2050. Yeah, so in the black2050.com. But check out Tre's book
shameless
on that
plug.
particular on that particular subject as well. And something else I always think about too though is trying to transpose white culture onto blackness, or like black
Like,
yeah,
right.
in terms of
Yeah.
black businesses, because we talk about that a lot in B school, and just if you read the Harvard Business Review or whatever, they talk about that quite often, where a company has gone into a new market, let's say in Latin America, Asia, or Africa, or something like that, right? And they want to take the same, or China's a really good example. They want to take the same type of mindset that they had to build their Silicon Valley unicorn, and think that that's just going to work in the new
Right.
environment that they're located.
Right.
And China has gotten really smart to that, and they basically said, no, we're going to take what you guys have done and make it completely and utterly Chinese,
Right.
right? So um you know I kind of think about that in terms of just black, trying to create a black unicorn using, white methodologies. Like some of them work in terms of, let's call it lean startup methodology, that might
Yeah.
work, that type of
Yeah.
thing. But then this culture of trying to create a unicorn in the first place, I don't know if that's really the best strategy for Black America. And for
Yeah.
those who are out there, unicorn is just a company that has a private company that has $1 billion valuation, right? And I think it's better to create systems that create 1,000 millionaires versus one billionaire.
Right.
So the more millionaires that you can create, I think that's a better just economic system
Right.
than trying to follow the Silicon Valley model of getting unicorn status, that type of thing. But I think that same methodology can apply to whether you talk about government contracts, you're talking about diversity programs, you're talking about funding events. You know, I think our lack of, I guess, financial culture in the Black community, we don't really have a lot of times the knowledge to really direct, what does it look like to create a truly Black company from the ground up. So what do you
Right.
think about that?
Yeah. I say that all the time. We don't need white companies in blackface. So like black people that just replicate what they see white people doing and carving out their little black niche with it. So that goes back to another piece of it. So what I was describing before in terms of the coordination and the cooperation was part of my 3 C's of economic development, which is cooperation, coordination, and culture. And the culture piece is the piece that most people miss and why most Black businesses fail because, like you said, they're trying to replicate models that don't directly are not culturally appropriate for us. For example, like an example of what a culturally appropriate practical strategy for fundraising would be kind of what we're building with the investment club network. So rather than trying to find a few large lead investors or raise a lot of money from venture capitalists, we want to expand the cap table to have more investors. Because fundamentally, African culture is more collaborative, cooperative, and circular than European culture, which is more linear and hierarchical. So more is better, higher is better, bigger is better from a European perspective. From an African perspective, um, more inclusive is better. So it does the village no good if there's one very rich person and everybody else is poor. That doesn't work from an African centered perspective. So we need to
It
build.
really doesn't even work from an American perspective if we look at what's going on in today's society.
Right. Well, it works for the people who set up the system that way.
That's true.
And
Yeah.
for a while. Now, yet to your point, it's unsustainable. Eventually, the people will revolt if you let it get too bad. Let it, like, for example, why wouldn't you just give people $1,000 a month during the pandemic? It doesn't cost that much compared to what you could risk losing as the owners and primary capital holders in the society. If you want to keep the capital structure and the economy roughly the same, it's best that you have consumers in that economy.
Well, with that too, but then also,
I'm
and
just looking at from what they want. They're not even
yeah,
acting in
right,
their
right,
own interest right now. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
I think let all this shit burn down. But whatever. That's all different.
Well, no, I was reading a book about Joseph P. Kennedy, and sorry, I guess the audience, me and Trey be having discussions all the time like this. So if it's getting too much, I'm sorry in getting off track. But this is kind of how our brains work when we just have, our private discussions. So we're kind of just letting you in on a private discussion that he and I would, normally have at, some point in time as well. But to go by In the Black
Oh yeah.
2050.
What are we supposed to be talking? We're supposed to be
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about the
yeah, yeah. But
investment
this is the
club.
way our conversations usually go, and yeah, it's just the world's listening this time around.
We'll get
Uh,
back to it though.
yeah,
Definitely want to talk about the
but
investment club thing before we get off.
yeah, yeah. But now I was thinking about Joseph P. Kennedy. I was reading a book about him maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and Joseph P. Kennedy is JFK's father, but he was also like the first. He had like a really important position, like the first Fed. He created like the Federal Reserve, or he was over, or the SEC. He was the first commissioner of this Securities and Exchange Commission, and he was the biggest crook. So somehow it's like, it takes one to know one in a way. And he created all these rules because all the rich people back in the 20s, in the Gilded Age, the Gilded Era, were afraid of just revolt uprising. So they had the biggest crook come in and actually reform the system in that
Hey, so
particular
that means Donald Trump
scenario.
should actually be the best person to fix this. The biggest crook in
Maybe if he was afraid that he could lose everything, I guess in
yeah.
that particular scenario, in terms of where all the loopholes were and that type of
Yeah.
that type of thing as well. But I just kind of think that's interesting in terms of, yeah, you're right. Maybe to keep the status quo, maybe they do need something like that in terms of reform. So maybe Elizabeth Warren isn't the worst person in the world to help reform, what's going on. Um, especially if rich people are risking losing everything. But
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
I'm here with Tre Baker. Tre is he's a self-proclaimed Black empowerment engineer and the author of In the Black 2050, a model for Black economic leadership in the 21st century. He's also the founder of Black Star Capital, a Black investment club network that wants to help organize the Black economy. If you guys like this video, please go ahead and press the thumbs up button, show us some love. We really appreciate the love. Share this video with your friends and family, and also subscribe to the Black Financial channel if you would like to receive more financial content like we're producing today here with Tre Baker. And Tre, where can they find you at? Where's the best place? In theblack2050.com or anywhere else?
intheblack2050.com. That's it.
You do IG at all, anything like that?
Uh, so it's in the Black 2050 on IG and Facebook and Twitter. So it's all, yeah.
It's all the same. All right, cool. I mean,
That's
we've talked.
partly why I chose the title because it was available on all the social media networks.
Okay, yeah, smart thinking. I mean, we've talked about investment clubs. I think investment clubs is about private capital markets, right? In terms of how do we invest in our in our businesses and organize Black capital around the nation and eventually around the world, right?
Right.
But I want to switch gears a little bit and actually talk about this reparations discussion too, right? From I guess a governmental perspective as well. So, what is your thought on reparations and what is your, I guess, practical plan in regards to how wealth can be transferred back to the Black community?
Right. So this is actually going to be the topic of my next book. So I have a whole book's worth. So how long you got? No. But no, but I'm happy that reparations has become more acceptable and not as radical of an idea in the mainstream, and you have more people talking about it. But what I'm seeing is a lack of uh, solutions-oriented strategies. There's some demands. There's people trying to put a number on it, trying to figure out how the government gets involved, but missing the larger picture of what a reparations program is for. And fundamentally, a reparations program is to one, prevent more harm being done to the Black community due to white supremacy and legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and all that. The one is to stop. Like Malcolm X had that quote about, putting a knife in the back and then pulling it out 6 inches and calling that progress. It's pulling the knife out. Like, stop doing this. So we need to stop the bleeding and then do what we can to repair the damage that has been done, and then set up systems and institutions to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. And another thing missing in the discussion is how you get reparations also matters. So let's say the United States government the president had a change of heart and all of a sudden decides to write us all a check for $14 trillion and like Bob Johnson suggested, and split it up equally amongst all Black people. We are still not in a position of power to do anything with those funds or prevent anything from happening once we have it, prevent any more harm being done to it. So we haven't built the infrastructure to really repair or prevent anything. So if reparations comes because of white benevolence, I would view it as somewhat of a failure. Like, the money would be cool, but my strategy on reparations is getting us to the point where it's not something that we demand. We're in a position of power to take it. Like, we're going to get reparations. Now, how you want to give it to us, we might give you some options, but it's not going to be up to you, whether it gets done or not. So once we get to that position, one, we probably won't even need reparations, but two, we'll be in a better position to actually use it.
Well, that's interesting. So I guess a couple of things, right? A new insight for me is thinking about, I guess, the Bob Johnson plan of give everyone $300,000, every Black person $300,000, and let them use it as they may. That that would actually lead back to, I guess, inclusion into the broader American system, right? So let's say best case scenario, let's say everyone invested that, or not even best case, a good case scenario, everyone invested that money back into the stock market or something like that, right? In effect, you're getting equity into, I guess, these companies that are out here, right?
Although I did just read an article saying that the stock market is mostly a Ponzi scheme and you don't actually get ownership in most of these companies, but that's a whole nother tangent.
Or maybe control. Maybe you don't get you don't get control, especially in the tech companies where they have
right.
Class A, Class B stocks.
Right. If they're not paying dividends and you don't have voting rights, then are you really an owner? But
Right. No, that's something, something to look at. But let's just say that's one of the cases. You're including yourself into, I guess the broader conversation. At worst, we will use that money strictly from a consumer basis and just buy a whole bunch of shit that we don't
Which is
need,
most
or
likely, which is most likely
yeah,
as of today. That's most
yeah,
likely.
or lead to the black agenda. So then, white guilt is gone, I guess, in that particular case, and then wealth wasn't retained, I guess, by the black community, also. So what would you do instead from a reparation standpoint to make sure that money stays, or we build the necessary infrastructure that we need? Because that's another thing. We can't really say when reparations are going to come. Like if it came today, I don't think we'll be like, wait, we don't have our shit together, in
Right.
terms of being built
Yeah,
out,
no, like
that type of
if they
thing.
wanted to write the check, I'd I wouldn't stand in the way. I would work very, very hard on a huge marketing campaign to kind of, I don't know, like the largest black coordinated effort in history to try to help educate black people on how to deal with wealth and the purpose of wealth. Like start having those conversations seriously, because now people have a little money in their pockets. They can kind of relax a little bit. They don't have to worry about day-to-day struggles, at least for a little bit. Because 300,000 doesn't go that far, especially if you don't know what to do with money. So there, I think we have enough capacity to get up to speed pretty quickly if the money's in our pockets already. I think we have the capacity to get up that learning curve. Now, maybe a certain percentage of the population is just going to waste it, but that's probably going to happen regardless. But I think there's enough people who would recognize the gravity of the situation and their responsibility to future generations that they wouldn't just trick it off. I think we'd be able to take that money and run with it and do some good things with it. It would be better if we already had some institutions in place, especially on the education front. So if we had a network of our own independently funded schools that have a curriculum on these things, on building wealth, the purpose of wealth, the purpose of money, what money means, what wealth means, things like that. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Well, I think we lost our guest for right now, so hopefully he comes back in here, in a second. But I find this to be a really interesting discussion. I think his computer may have died. So hopefully, Tre comes back here in a moment. Just as a reminder, everyone, I've been here with Tre Baker. Tre's a great friend of mine. I've known him for over 20 years. Tre is here he is, self-proclaimed Black empowerment engineer and the author of In the Black 2050.
Yeah,
Tre, you there?
yeah, my bad. My battery on my computer ran out, so I'm gonna have to switch to my phone.
Okay, can we see
So,
you? Can you bring up
yeah,
your face again? Let me see. Ask to start video.
There we go.
There we go. All right, but
Sorry about
yeah,
that, guys. We were talking about reparations, and
yeah. So we were talking about reparations, and I was actually going to bring up another point. So I was reading an article in the Washington Post. Came out. What day was this? Maybe July 2nd, or no, yesterday. So July 8th. It came up yesterday. And there's a question in here. It's like an FAQ about reparations, and it says, "What do the polls show?" So in the U.S., reparations has never been a broadly popular idea. In 2019, 29% of Americans believe that the government should pay or should make cash payouts to Black Americans who are the descendants of slaves, a Gallup poll reported, but that number was up from 14% in 2002. In the newer poll, 73% of Black Americans supported the idea, up from a simple majority before. Support among whites went from 6% to 16%. The 2019 poll showed a partisan divide. Only 5% of Republicans supported reparations compared to 42% of Democrats.
well, I
Right?
disagree with the question, because it's not only the government. First of all, we pay taxes. So if the government paid it to us, that's just us paying it to ourselves. We paid the taxes that the government's using. So first we'd have to stop paying taxes, and then the government would have to send a check. But it's not just the government. Because I was just listening to somebody talk about how Citibank participated in some things, or the company that eventually became Citibank. participated in things related to slavery. So Citibank also owes. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not just the United States government, and especially not our tax dollars. That goes for like police shootings too. I was just somebody was talking about this the other day with police shootings. You know, that have like a lawsuit, and then the city pays. So in a majority Black city like Atlanta, if they pay, if like Rashad Brooks's family sues the city and actually wins, that's a majority Black city who's paying the taxes to fund the government who's going to pay that settlement. So the money comes from Black people to pay for that settlement. So like that can't happen. We gotta, that money needs to come from, like in the case of police shootings, it should come from police pensions and salaries of all police in that department. So that'll shut stuff down real quick. But anyway, But reparations paid only by the United States government is not the goal. Who pays it? I'm actually indifferent on who pays it. There's a bill that needs to be paid. Somebody's going to have to pay it. That's not us. That's all I'm concerned about.
Well, that's interesting though when you talk about that type of stuff though, because I think that's where me and Boyce differ a little bit, where I do believe in the importance of economic power, right? But for the most part, that is all that he talks about, right? And that's what he focuses on, that type of thing. What you're talking about right there is a lack of political power that has occurred in terms of, but maybe it's this disenfranchisement of voting, maybe or maybe it's apathy, and people thinking that the system isn't working for them. So what is going to actually change? But the reason that happens is because we're not holding our public officials accountable who's making these laws in that particular scenario. So maybe it's a stopgap in terms of political power. I don't know, but it seems to be a barrier in terms of like a lot of those things actually changing. Another thing that I saw.
I mean, political power is related to economic power, right? You can't separate those two.
Right. Yeah, so you can't separate those two. And then like something else I saw here on, let's say, Washington Post, Black families pay significantly higher property taxes than white families. New analysis show unfair property assessments lead to widespread overtaxation of Black Americans' homes, that type of thing, right?
It's interesting because that's weird because there's another study that talks about how they undervalue Black-owned properties when it's time to sell. So like when you get an assessment or when you sell it, they undervalue it. So they overvalue.
Yeah. So basically, overvalue. They overvalue when it's time to pay taxes, and undervalue when it's time to actually sell. Right. And I see a lot of this, and there's just so much that needs to be solved. I think we're going to solve it, and this is just a piece by piece thing. And I didn't know where I was going with that, but yeah, go ahead.
I focus that's a disclaimer for myself too. I focus mostly on the economic piece, but like Dr. Francis Cress Welsing talked about there, I think there's 9 areas of people activity: labor, love, politics, economics, war, and some other things. So like all of that needs to be repaired. We need institutions to deal with all of those things. But fundamentally, institutions require resources. So if you don't have the economics together, and this is not a either or thing, like we need to be building these all concurrently. Right. Mm-hmm. But without the economic piece, nothing else works. We've tried it. We've tried to have political power and only use the power of the vote. But because money has corrupted politics in this country so much, money is also speech. Money is power. Money is equal to or greater than the power of the vote, which is why the acts of Congress and how they're behaving right now is predictable, because that's how they're incentivized. They're financially incentivized to behave the way that they're behaving, not in the interest of the people, but in the interest of their financial incentives. So without an economic piece, the political piece can't really come together fully.
Well, back to the reparations.
Unless we change how politics is done in America, which I'm for too.
Well, let's talk about that. Back to the reparations discussion, right? With only 29% of Americans support reparations. I guess that's from the government perspective. But let's say, and you mentioned expanding you don't care who pays the bill as long as somebody pays it.
Right.
If the majority of Americans aren't in favor of reparations, how does the discussion move forward, and how does how is pressure applied to make reparations occur?
Well, I wonder what the polls were for Japanese Americans who got reparations, and for Jewish people who got reparations. I wonder what the poll said in the time. It's not rhetorical. I'm wondering. I might have to Google that later. So, yeah, the opinion of white people related to reparations is irrelevant. They don't. It's not their decision. They don't have anything to do with it. We have to decide how much we think they owe us, and it's on us to collect it. So, to answer your question, that involves building economic and political power. That involves creating systems, a culture of collectiveness and African-centeredness that brings us together on the basis of something more than skin color, something as superficial as skin color, because that's not enough. But once you get to the point where you have economic and political power, what they think about it is irrelevant, because you will control the systems, the funding mechanisms and the systems that would write that check. So technically you would kind of write it to yourself, because you have taken over that particular area of power to get it. So let's bring this less abstract and more practical and a real world scenario. So we don't have to wait on the federal government. There are many municipalities and towns and cities in America that are majority Black. So we control the government budget. We can decide to give ourselves reparations out of that budget. We can decide how it comes, how it's funded, and then how that money is spent. We don't have to wait. For white people and corporations that are interested in helping, we can solicit, funds from them. It's like, we have a program. This is how much it's going to cost. This is how much we calculated we are owed. You can voluntarily contribute to this. So, one, I think we should look at it strategically as 1,000 different reparations bills, or
So that's interesting. So you're not even looking at it from a national broad perspective. From, I guess, yeah. So
well,
not a national broad perspective.
That's not how anything works in America. You don't, women's suffrage, the right to choose. None of that started at the federal level. You build court cases at the local level, and then you build it up. So same thing from an economic standpoint. The goal is not to create Google in one try. The goal is to create 1,000 tech companies, and maybe one of them becomes on a Google level. But even if they don't, they're creating sustainable income and jobs. Because I'm more concerned about income than jobs, but that's another it's another topic. I don't hear you.
That's me. Oh, yeah. So got you. So that's interesting in that particular case, because you're right. I mean, most things start in a groundswell type of way in terms of movements. And maybe it is going to Atlanta city government and saying we want reparations, or DC Metro and demanding reparations, instead of worrying about it on a national level to begin with as well. But no, I think this is all interesting. I want to get into one last topic before we get out of here, and that's about the equity programs piece that we talked about before today's call. And by the way, everybody, I'm here with Tre Baker. Tre is a Black empowerment engineer and the author of In the Black 2050, a model for Black economic leadership in the 21st century. He's also the founder of Black Star Capital, a Black investment club network that wants to help organize the Black economy. And today we're talking about a practical economic plan for Black America. If you guys like what Tre is talking about in our discussion, please go ahead and press the thumbs up button. Please make sure that you share and also subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Tre, let's talk about equity programs and I guess your views and thoughts on those. So we talked about it a little bit before, but tell me where you wanted to go with that in regards to, I guess, that discussion. So
right.
I guess my first question: what is equity? What is an equity program, and then what's your opinion about them?
Right. So we were talking about diversity programs earlier, and I've been thinking about that in terms of like the actual help or harm it will do in the long term for the Black community. And what we don't need we don't need diversity based on something as superficial as skin color. Even corporations don't need that. Corporations need diversity of experience. And because of my skin color, I might have a different experience that might be valuable. So from a corporate perspective, diversity is still valuable, but it's not simply based on skin color. If you want to help Black people, I'm not sure hiring more Black people is the solution. What we don't need employment, we need equity. And I'm not talking about like equity in terms of, people talk about equality versus equity and what that means. I'm talking about like actual equity and productive assets. We need that. Income generating assets. So rather than hiring a Black person, I would rather just, if you wanted to do something charitable, give Black people stock in your company. Preferably if it's dividend paying stock. If you don't pay dividends, I don't know if I need it. But
well, you can always sell it, I guess. I don't know.
There's ways to generate income even if you don't pay dividends. So I'll take it. Like I'll take some Google stock, as reparations.
I say Amazon don't pay dividends, I don't think. So I'll still take that though.
I'll take Amazon stock as reparations. So I've been thinking about creating an equity program, like a model for an equity program. So basically disrupting diversity programs. And I've got a whole, summary on my thinking on it, but basically it centers around the fundamental premise of diversity programs, I think, is flawed and creates systems and furthers the system of dependency of Black people on white power structures, specifically employment. They're using employment as a tool to manipulate us. And it's not like a bunch of people in a back room scheming this up, trying to move us like pieces on a chessboard. It just happens naturally. Like, so you're going to end up hiring the people that play into your notion of what acceptable behavior is for a Black person in a white environment. This is not necessarily productive for us. And I think the more people will study it, I think it's psychologically damaging for people in those environments. So like, the friends that I know that work for white corporations, they might enjoy their actual function, but that environment is very damaging to them. And most of them can't wait to leave. So is offering more Black people employment in that environment better? Or would it be better to create systems that allow us to create our own companies, work for ourselves? So I'm not saying every Black person needs to be an entrepreneur or start a business, but they could work for Black-owned businesses and they could have that option. Most of us don't have that option because we just don't employ enough people. One of the statistics I like to talk about is the fact that all the top 100 Black-owned businesses in America make less than half of what Walmart makes in terms of revenue. Now, I don't know what the employment numbers are, but I'm sure it's comparable. So all the top 100, no, I think this was all Black. Yeah, this is all Black-owned businesses make less than half the amount of revenue as Walmart. So in terms of economic impact, most Black-owned businesses are insignificant. If they could all disappear tomorrow and the United States economy would not suffer at all. So our main goal with an equity program that would replace or supplement a diversity program would be to address that issue. So building the capacity of existing Black-owned businesses and helping to create Black-owned businesses that can reach some level of scale that would be significant in terms of an employment perspective. So what we need to do is focus initially on employment. So we have an option of not having to work for white people if we don't want to. But the ultimate goal is to create income that is independent of employment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what that looks like in real life would be something like a sovereign wealth fund. I think it's Kuwait maybe I know Saudi Arabia has one, but I know Kuwait takes care of its citizens from like basic needs perspective. And that's basically funded by oil money. So we don't have oil, but we can get control and access to productive assets that generate income that can be used to take care of the community and maybe create a floor. So we can fund our own universal basic income program outside of the United States. And I think that, so ultimately, like when I'm thinking about reparations, And this all ties in together. Equity program, investment clubs, reparations, it's all the same thing. It's really just building an infrastructure. My ultimate goal is 100% Black unemployment. That would be the goal for humanity too, to free ourselves from having to work. Now, despite popular belief, that won't mean that people won't work. Because even if you gave me $10 million today, which is my number, that's my fucking number, I'm still going to go out and do things. I'm going to do things that are productive, some things that maybe not be productive. I might get into painting. I wanted to learn how to play guitar. But at this moment, I don't have enough time for that. But, if I had $10 million, I probably would. So my ultimate goal is to create income for Black people. And I think that's where an equity program comes in, and that's where a reparations program comes in. So we're generating income. Now, what we do with that income is up to us. And then, but the overall goal is to free ourselves from working just for survival, working to survive.
Well, I mean, let's just tie it all back together, because I think that's a good segue to tie everything that we've been talking about today, back together into a conversation, right? So we've talked about investment clubs, we've also been talking about reparations, and then also equity programs too, right? Right. All of these different things are solutions, for the Black community to be better off financially in the United States. Right. So tie it all back together for me. Like, what is the unifying factor that's tying all this stuff back together to this goal?
So economic independence is the unifying factor. So you have talked about building infrastructure. An investment club network, what we're building at the Black Star Capital Network, is the infrastructure for Black people to invest in alternative assets primarily, but also, stocks and bonds and normal things like that. But you build the infrastructure for Black people to invest in ways that individually they probably couldn't. So like if you want to invest in startups, you have to have expertise to know how to do that. And then two, you need a pretty significant amount of capital, even though there are some websites now that have low minimums. In order to really make an impact and generate returns from venture capital, you need a significant amount of money. So like a lot of minimums for angel groups would be $25,000 to $50,000, and that's just one asset class. So your whole investment portfolio shouldn't be that. You should have at least 10 times that probably in your portfolio. So if you don't have, $250,000, $500,000, it's going to be hard for you to really invest in venture capital and private equity on a significant level. In addition to, this is probably not your day job and you don't know what you're doing, and you might not have any interest in learning how to do this, but you do need exposure to that asset class in terms of building your investment portfolio. So if we build the infrastructure to allow Black people to collectively invest in things that benefit the community, but also generate income and wealth, then we'll have a place to deploy capital from a reparations perspective. So if we've got this network that's investing in a company, and let's say the network can only raise half of it, but now we have this reparations fund that can fill in that gap and put in the rest of the funds. You've already built the infrastructure, you're already doing these investments, you're already building wealth, you're already doing the things that need to be done. Reparations is kind of a supplement on top of that. It's helping move things along and speed things along faster. Same thing with the equity program. So let's say, this is actually a very good example. You got Google, PayPal, Seed Invest. They're all starting these funds for equity funds to invest in Black-owned companies. One, those need to be grants and not investments. Or if they're investments, you need to give up your rights to those shares. So like you make the investment, but then give the ownership to other Black people. Because we don't need white people investing and then getting ownership in our companies, and then we're helping them get rich off that success. But so you've got these programs with Google and PayPal. So rather than Google just trying to find random Black founders to invest in, which they're not qualified to do, nobody at Google is qualified to invest in Black companies. Maybe two people. But if they were, they would not be working for Google. But anyway, so Google could go to this investment club network and just insert itself into the deal flow. So like we've already identified companies that Black people have vetted and Black people find valuable and worth investing in. So you just come along and add on, jump in the cap table. So you're not actually just choosing winners and losers.
Right. No, that's interesting. That's interesting, and I'm seeing the big picture, right? So, part one, how do we educate our children and educate our community to be able to produce high quality businesses, or like I guess be like extreme producers, serving the needs of just Black community, but then also beyond as well. The second part has to do with, I guess, the investment networks and organizing of Black capital. Right. So once we have these businesses in place that with great entrepreneurs who have great ideas, who are actually producing, how do we funnel money into those businesses using the Black dollars to do so? The next
Black
phase,
dollars and other dollars. It doesn't have to be.
I was going to say that next, right? So that's the next piece then, right? Too, is how do you then go back to Google instead of you funding this business or creating this fund where you're investing and you're asking for a certain amount of control, come to the Black Investment Network and be a part of, or I guess a piece of that, I guess, deal flow, and be a part of the cap table, but where you are not asking for some type of control of the business, because from a reparations perspective, from a corporate reparations perspective, it's the correct thing to do. And then I guess the last part would be local governments and then also federal government, how they fit into all of this in terms of having reparations funds that can invest into these businesses as well, and in the Black community in general. Am I hearing you right?
Right. So if we on our own, without permission from anybody, because we don't need permission to do any of these things, start building up that economic infrastructure, then when people are ready to write a check, we'll have something in place. So I was talking to, somebody else I was recently connected with, and he was talking about, complaining about Silicon Valley and the lack of representation and things. And then somebody just approached him and was like, well, how about you just start a fund? Here's we'll give you some money if you want to start a fund. He was like, no. That's not what I do, because this is how they set us up. Like they'll give people funds who they're in proximity to, who may not necessarily be qualified to do this work, and then they'll fail, and then they'll point to that and see, they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, which has been happening. I can say the same for diversity as well in the workplace, right? There's a book called let's say Diversity Inc., The Failed Promise of a $1 billion Business, right? And it talks about a lot of this type of stuff. Truthfully, from my perspective, I think that you're right in terms of being inclusionary into these large white corporations from a diversity perspective. Isn't really that beneficial, or hasn't been that beneficial, only for a certain amount of winners. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we still only have 4 Black CEOs in the Fortune 500, right? And then if you look at the board of the board of advisors, or the board of directors, excuse me, and then the CEO suite of, let's say, all the major tech companies, and then all the biggest companies in the world, they're all damn near white. Right, white male oriented. So it makes me to question, how much do white people from a work perspective actually need us into especially if they're building these multi-billion dollar businesses already. And the only way to change it is if we provide, I guess, economic pressure, or we apply economic pressure in other types of ways from a consumer perspective. I don't know. That's just me just kind of spitballing and thinking through it. And then doing and implementing, what you have been talking about, for the last, 45 minutes or so as well.
Right.
So
we do, yeah.
Anyway,
so that's another thing we didn't get into, but that's very important too, our consumer power. So we do have consumer power. The problem is we can't flex that consumer power without viable alternatives. So we can't stop shopping at Walmart if we don't have our own thing. So I can stop buying certain things from Walmart because We Buy Black exists. So if We Buy Black didn't exist, or something like that, then it would be much harder to wean ourselves off of their systems. So things like Google and Netflix, we do have streaming services, but nowhere near the scale to make it viable. So yeah, our consumer power is something that we can flex, but again, we would need the infrastructure in place to properly flex that. We need alternatives to go to. And at that point, you're not really boycotting, you're just leaving them. It's like, all right, we don't need you anymore. We're not using this. We permit permanent boycotts.
Love it. Tre, man, thanks for being my guest today. I think we're out of time for today. So for the people who want to find you, how can they find you?
InTheBlack2050.com, in the Black 2050 on Facebook, on Twitter and Instagram. But the thing that would help me the most is go to intheblack2050.com and sign up for the email list. And I very rarely send out emails. I probably sent out maybe one this year. But
oh man, we got to change that.
Right. But when I do, it's important. And going forward, I post blog articles too that might be of interest. But when I send out an email, it's usually an action item. So it's something that you can do yourself, or it's at least going to set you on the path to some actual practical solution. Because that's mainly what I'm about, is practical solution. Like, we don't need to talk about this anymore. We got the playbook. It's time to execute.
Got you. My last question to you is, what do you wish your 20-year-old self knew, looking back at your age now?
Man, a lot. You mean like from an economic, like investing perspective, or just life?
Yeah, just in general. Yeah, just looking at your life now. What do you wish your 20-year-old self knew?
I think I should have spent more time building up my personal network, not just professional, like actual professional and personal, but taking advantage of the spaces that I was in. So I went to Vanderbilt and Harvard, and I made very few friends at both of those places, with people who are arguably, the masters of society at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't take advantage of that. So, building up my network now from an investment perspective, should have got into real estate during the Great Recession and land. If I had to do anything, if I could tell my 20-year-old self anything, buy land. If you get extra money, buy land. Don't let your aunts and your dad sell your grandfather's farm.
Yeah. Got really personal right there. But I appreciate it. All right, everybody. We're here with Tre Baker.
Buy land,
we've been here with Tre
and build networks.
We've been here with Tre Baker. Tre is the author of Black Empowerment Engineering, the author of In the Black 2050. Please make sure you go to intheblack2050.com to check out his book, and make sure that you check out his Black Star Capital, a Black investment club network that wants to help organize the Black economy. So before you get out of here, please make sure that you like this video, share, and subscribe. Tre is one of the most insightful, intelligent people that I know. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of this interview, because I know I always get a lot out of talking with Tre as well. So on behalf of Tre Baker, my name is Lawrence Watkins. You guys take care, be blessed, and have a wonderful day. All right, bye-bye.
Peace.